I got one of these sideways lessons today. I was driving up 27 highway the other day. I guess it was around 3 o'clock. And I thought to myself, where in the world is all these people coming from? I can remember hitchhiking to the Dead Rat, Rocky Side. Well, that's what they used to call it. The old timers called it Dead Rat. And not seeing a car once every 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And they was cars. It was unbelievable how many cars. Didn't used to be that many people around here. So that reminded me of my theory. Now this ain't in the Bible, okay? What this little thing I'm on, that's a little sidelight here. It's not in the Bible. I got a theory. That's my personal theory. Now just try to picture in your mind all these unborn souls just sitting around in there wherever God keeps them, waiting until it's time for them to be born. And they're sitting there watching what's going on earth, okay? And they're trying to figure out when the best time would be for them to get born. You got to admit, the last couple of 100 years ain't been that good. So they probably kept waiting for a better time. Then one day, here recently, they hear God and Gabriel talking, and God telling Gabriel, get that horn out and start polishing it up, because it's almost time, Gabe. Then they realize, and there's a mad rush to get born before it's too late. Now that's just my theory, but I want to show you something. I don't know if y'all can see this. It just looks like probably a blank piece of paper with a for the last 12,000 years, from here's when Christ was born. Right here. That's when Christ was born. See that little line? I don't either. That little line going across here? Not many folks on earth. Now, here in the last 2,000 years, let me show you what it's done. Right here, it has shot up, like straight up, from less than less than 500 million people, in a little bit before, to about 1995, to 7.7 billion people in just that short amount of time. Something's up. Something's up. Now, my little theory about them unborn souls that's sitting up there in heaven, they're trying to figure out when to be born. It ain't in the Bible. It's probably not scriptural. Probably foolishness. But I think there's something to it. Anyway. Anyway, I was watching all them cars coming up Highway 27. And the way my mind works, it's kind of crazy sometimes. I got to wondering, all these people out here, what in the world would make me think that I'm that special to God? He's got this huge new crowd of people to fool with. And it looks to me like there's, bless you, like there's way too many of them, okay? Now I've got friends, excuse me, I've got friends and family that I love, and I'll be getting to my point here in just a second, okay? I got friends and I got family that I love, and I generally like being around other people, but there's a limit. There's a limit to how many of them I can stand at one time. And I guess I've been told that I'm reasonably intelligent and not too abnormal looking, but other than that, there's not a lot going on here, you know, that would make me stand out in this huge crowd of people. Just an average person with average skills, average intelligence, and average faith. Nothing special, just one more face in the crowd. And according to this population chart I showed you, that crowd's getting pretty good size. It's getting bigger and bigger, and more godless, and more wicked, and more evil every day. And here's the worst part. When I look at them, I can see that I'm not that much different than they are. I can identify with most of them because I can still see and at least still remember all that sin in my heart. Then I start, we're following my mind down this rabbit hole, okay? And when I get to thinking like that, I start feeling useless. I start feeling like a failure as a Christian. Especially if I pick up my Bible and I start studying about one of these folks in the Bible, one of them superhero role models that is in the Bible, man, if I could be just like one of them. And I can't wait to get to heaven to see Abraham and Isaac and all these other heroes in the Bible. They were obviously God's special people. They're so much different from me. So much more spiritual than me. So much closer to God. He put them in His book, okay? How could my little imperfect life ever compare to one of them superheroes of the Bible? God, He must have loved them a whole lot more than He loves me to put them in the Bible now. And then it hit me. Hang on a minute. If you're looking for a hero in the Bible to pattern your life after, you might want to take a closer look at some of them folks. You might want to take a closer look at yourself. You might be surprised at a couple of things. Most of the people in the Bible, most of them, are incredibly damaged people with an awful lot of problems in their lives. And they ain't many exceptions. It's amazing to me how many of them people was seriously damaged with all kind of family problems. But just because the Bible heroes was blind and stupid, fallen human beings, as sinners like me, that don't justify me or excuse me when I do the same things they did. I want to get that out there first, because I'm going to talk about some of these folks. And then I'm going to tell you why it matters. I'm not the only one. That's the first thing that comes out at me. When I read about some of these people and some of the stupid stuff they done, it makes me feel a little better knowing I'm not the only one with serious issues. Everybody in here's got serious issues. We keep them hid real good, okay? But we got serious issues. All right. Anyway, it helps make me feel a little bit better about myself when I go studying these folks, and I realize if they're in the Bible and they're worse than I am, I must be making some points in God's little game here. I may not be perfect, but at least I'm better than they was. All right, let's talk. I'm going to talk about a few of them, and about the time y'all start getting tired of me talking about them, well, I'll tell you why I'm talking about them. Adam. What was his big problem? Well, he was a blame shifter. Them twins back there in that playroom, we ask who done it. The first thing one of them says is, "She did it." She didn't, but that's what she says. At Genesis 3:12, and the man said, "The woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat." He had a problem. Eve, let's talk about her. Eve, that first woman, she couldn't control her appetite. That's right, she had an eating disorder. Genesis 3 verse 6, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. Why did he do that?
Because he loved her.
All you married men know why he done that.
Didn't want to hear her.
Hey,
I'm sorry. The present must be accepted, of course. And then here's this fella. According to the Bible, according to Genesis chapter 9, when Noah come along, he was the last righteous man on earth. God called him righteous in the Bible. Let me tell you what he done. I wouldn't consider this righteous. Genesis 9 verse 20. By the way, before I start, let me tell you, a husbandman is somebody that raises vineyards, raises grapes. Okay, and Noah, excuse me, and Noah began to be an husbandman, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine, and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. He liked to get drunk and lay around naked in his house. They ain't no nice way of saying it. And this is Noah. And God just got done calling him righteous. That's not the whole story, but I ain't going to get into it.
I ain't gotta be drunk, I'll still be finding myself naked.
Too much information. Too much. Now, Abraham. There's three big religions on earth that consider Abraham the patriarch, the grandfather of it all. He must be pretty good. He let other men walk off with his wife twice. Genesis 12:11. And it came, his wife was Sarah. And it came to pass when he was come near to enter into Egypt that he said unto Sarah his wife, Behold now, I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass when the Egyptians shall see you, that they shall say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. Say, I pray thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee.
What a creep.
Well,
Excuses.
that was just the first time. The next time in Genesis 20, starting with verse 2, And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, She is my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said, Behold, thou art but a dead man for the woman which thou hast taken, for she is a man's wife. And that's Abraham. Father Abraham. They got a song about him and everything. These are our heroes. Sarah, his wife, she had a problem too. She figured since she was about 90 years old, she wasn't going to be able to have a kid. So she told her husband to go in there to that Egyptian maid they had and have a kid with her, and then ended up hating her. Let me just read it to you. Sounds like something out of
Sounds like wife
Something out of something
Husband's
outside.
woman.
Genesis 16, verse 1. Now these are people that are righteous. God calls these folks righteous. Now Sarah, 16:1. Now Sarah, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had an handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said unto Abraham, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarah. I bet he did. Anyway, and Sarah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean. And Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. I can't see Ann telling me nothing like this. But anyway. Okay. I've got 4 or 5 more here I want to go over. And like I said, I've got a reason for doing this. These are Bible heroes that God calls righteous. Lot. God went to a lot of trouble to save Lot's life. He sent an angel up there to warn him to go to the hills. Lot didn't want to. He wanted to go around and be around that crowd down there in Zoar. That same bunch that was in Sodom and Gomorrah. They did all that same. Anyway. he had a serious problem with choosing the wrong crowd to be friends with. Genesis 19 verse 30. And Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountain, and his 2 daughters with him, for he feared to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. Now after God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, them girls figured, everybody's dead. Ain't nobody else in the world. Okay, anyway. And the firstborn said unto the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come in unto us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. And they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he perceived not when she lay down, nor when she arose. And it came to pass on the morrow that the firstborn said to the younger, Behold, I lay yesternight with my father. Let us make him drink wine this night also, and go thou in, and lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. And they made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger arose and lay with him, and he perceived not when she lay down, nor when she arose. Thus were both the daughters of Lot with child by their father. And the firstborn bare a son, and called his name Moab. The same is the father of the Moabites unto this day. And the younger, she also bare a son, and called his name Ben-Ammi. The same is the father of the children of Ammon unto this day. For before God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, an angel came down to Lot, because he was a righteous man, and told him, Lot, run to the mountains and hide in a cave. And then while I was up there, Lot's daughter come up with that idea. She said that they was childless and there wasn't no other men around, since God had killed them all. And she said they needed to give Lot wine to make him drunk. While he's drunk, they'd sleep with him. And the next night they got Lot drunk again, and the younger daughter slept with him. As a result of this righteous man's incestuous relationship with his own daughters, both kids got pregnant, and the older daughter had a son named Moab, who became the father of the Moabites. You ever heard that name? And the younger daughter had a son named Ben-Ammi, who was the father of the Ammonites. Guess what come of that? The Moabites and the Ammonites were bitter enemies of Israel. And after that happened, that's the last you hear of Lot in the Bible. He chose to live his life among them sinners in Sodom and Gomorrah and Zoar. And he died a drunk, broke, old man living in a cave. It don't usually turn out too good when you decide you want to live around sinners. And living in Sodom and Gomorrah with all of their twisted perversions apparently affected Lot and his daughters. Kids raised by drunks usually become drunks, and it sounds to me like he was a drunk. Kids raised in a perverted society like Sodom or America usually become perverts. Now then, Job. I ain't got much bad to say about Job. He's the epitome of faith. But I got a little something to say about his wife. Job lived about the same time Abraham did, but he had a nagging, faithless wife. He could pick them. Job 2 verse 9. Then said his wife unto him, Dost thou still retain thine integrity? Just curse God and die. Isaac, the one that his daddy almost killed him, talked his wife into hiding the fact that they was married, just like Abraham did. Lord have mercy. Rebecca. Y'all know who Rebecca is? Not of Sunnybrook Farm. This is the other Rebecca. She was the first mail order bride. she was a conniving manipulator. In Genesis 27, she come up with this plot to dress Jacob up with goat skins and make him make some goat soup for his daddy so he could steal Esau's blessing from Isaac. And Jacob, the one that done that, he out-wrestled God. Got his name changed. He was a pathological liar. He couldn't tell the truth. Are y'all starting to see a pattern here? Is there any of these people's descriptions sounding like people that you know? Maybe, or I hope you're not seeing yourself in a whole lot of this. Jacob, yeah, he was a liar. Rachel, the good-looking daughter of Laban, she was a kleptomaniac. Y'all know the story, I'm sure. Let me read it to you. It's just one verse. Genesis 31:19. And Laban, I had an uncle named Laban, but he wasn't like that anyway. And Laban went to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's. Moses. You're not going to say nothing bad about Moses, are you? Moses had a problem. According to Numbers 12:13, that Moses, it pretty much says he was the humblest man on the face of the earth. He had anger management problems from hell. He had a serious problem with his temper. Exodus 32:19, and it came to pass as soon as he came nigh unto the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing. And Moses' anger waxed hot, and he cast the tables out of his hands and brake them beneath the mount. And here's one, this cost him right here in Numbers 20 verse 11. And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice. And the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their beasts also. I'll tell you in a minute, that cost him. Good old Aaron, Moses' brother, the one, his mouthpiece, his lawyer. Aaron had just watched Pharaoh defeat all of watched God defeat all of Pharaoh's and drowned the whole Egyptian army. He had just saw that. And while Moses was up on the mountain there getting the 10 Commandments, Aaron made a golden idol while he was waiting on Moses. I guess he had a memory lapse. I guess. Samson. Old Samson put Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jesse Ventura to shame. But he couldn't pick a woman either. He married this good-looking, false-hearted woman and ended up committing suicide. That's in Judges 16. Poor old Eli. I kind of relate to poor old Eli because I got two spoiled little twins. I've got two little twin girls that I spoiled rotten. Sweet little children.
Sour Patch Kids, huh?
That's right. Eli was the high priest that ruled over Israel, but he was a helpless, incompetent father that didn't raise his kids right, and he lost them to immorality and untimely death. That's in 1 Samuel 2. Saul, that's the one that Israel wanted to be their king. Demanded that he be their king because he was good looking. Big, healthy, good looking fella. He was a psycho. He was psychotic. He was. He had manic bursts of anger. He had episodes of deep depressions and traces of paranoia, and he committed suicide. I ain't got but a few more because it's starting to get depressing. David. Everybody loved David. He was a friend of God. He wrote all them songs and all them psalms and everything. Poor old David. He tried to hide his adultery with Bathsheba by killing her husband. That's in 2 Samuel. Does that sound righteous to you? I've seen a lot of pretty women, but I ain't never seen one that I'd do all that for. Solomon! Does anybody know what Solomon's real problem was? He was a sex addict. He was addicted to it. He was the wisest man in the world, but he was a sex addict that had over 1,000 sexual partners. If you don't believe me, read 1 Kings. Everybody knows who Hosea was, don't you? That little short book in the middle, it's in the Old Testament. Hosea was an incredibly forgiving man. This is the next to the last one, okay? He was a pushover for a woman who was a nymphomaniac. If you don't believe me, read it sometime. It's right there in black and white. All the prophets, every single one of them, even though they spoke for God, they struggled with impurity, depression, unfaithful wives, and broken families. So what? Now that I've got y'all feeling real good, so what? What's the point in listing all these problems these folks had? Are we supposed to just throw our hands up and admit God's people ain't nothing but a big steaming pot, a mess? Well, no. There's some practical messages you can get out of them people, them broken lives of these people. And the main first one I get is, God didn't try to hide none of that stuff. He wrote it down in His book just how sorry, low down, trashy, and no countdown people was, and still righteous. Since God is honest about how sorry and low down we are, His people, since God's honest, you probably need to be honest yourself. The temptation is strong to try to put on a phony, self-righteous mask and play like you're better than you really are. But that just makes things worse. God don't play hypocrite. Don't try to hide what you really are. God can take it. The gospel makes you free to come live in the light with all your warts, all your defects, all your flaws, and all the stupidity that you do. The gospel makes you free. And once you admit it to yourself, once you admit how sorry you are to God and to yourself, that's when He can start working on you. He can work on you because you can't change it. You can't do a thing about it except play hypocrite. That's about all you can do. And by the way, before you get to worrying about it, you ain't, all these folks that I rattled off here, if that ain't proof enough, I'm going to tell you something. You ain't got to be perfect to belong to God. You ain't got to be perfect, because your standing before God is not based on how perfect your life is. God called every one of these folks that I rattled off, even Saul, he called every one of them righteous. It's not what kind of problems you got. It's how you handle, or who you let handle, your issues. And then, about the time your heart and that little voice in your head starts telling you how sorry you are, you're not really a Christian because you do this, because you're thinking about that. You looked at them dirty pictures. You did this, that, and the other. When your heart starts doing that to you, just remember this. 1 John 3, verse 20. For if our heart condemn us, God is greater than our heart and knoweth all things. So just leave the judging to God. Y'all know who wrote most of the New Testament, all them letters and all that stuff? Good old Paul, that old boy, that hunchback Jew with the speech impediment. He spent his energy struggling with sin and left the task of judging himself with God. Well, what kind of sin did Paul commit? He wrote the Bible, about half of it. He went around killing Christians. And that weighed heavy on his conscience. But he told them in 1 Corinthians, and I'm going to read you the King James, and then I'm going to read the New International just to make sure everybody understands what he's saying. 1 Corinthians 4 verse 3, but with me it is a very small thing that I should be judged of you, or of man's judgment. Yea, I judge not mine own self. Now, I'm going to read that again out of the New International Version. Oh, that thing. Anyway, I care, this is 1 Corinthians 4 verse 3. I care very little if I am judged by you or any human court. Indeed, I do not even judge myself. He figured it out. He figured it out. Now here's another lesson that comes out of all these poor pitiful folks here. Sin always has painful consequences. Well, I thought when you got saved, all that was took care of and you didn't have to face no consequences. No. Sin always has painful consequences that follow your bad decisions. Now, most folks, if they get it right, they'll eventually lose their taste for sin because they've been changed from a hog to a sheep, okay? Now, you throw a hog out there in a mud hole and feed him slop, and he's happy. He loves it. Wallers in it. You take a sheep, well, just try to throw it in the mud hole. You got a fight on your hands right there, and then try to feed it slop. It don't like it. It don't want it because it don't taste good to them. When God changes you from a hog to a sheep, that's what will happen to you if you're doing it right. And if it don't happen to you, you ain't doing it right. All right. And anyway, sin, like I said, always has bad consequences. And eventually you'll lose your taste for sin. And if you don't, you should at least avoid it so you can get away from the pain that comes with it, because Galatians 6 verse 7 says, be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Now something about sowing and reaping. I say, what was it? Preacher, I believe you preached on that one time. You sow a little. You get them little bitty tiny packets of Ferrymore seeds, and you better lay you out a row, and you plant them little bitty tiny seeds, you put them in a teaspoon. You get more than a teaspoon back. So whatever you plant, you're going to get a whole lot more back than you planted. So if you don't lose your taste for sin, you're to kind of think, that's going to cost me later. Okay. One other thing that you can get out of these losers in the Bible is that you're not alone. You ain't alone. You ain't got to face all this junk alone. That list of defective heroes in the Bible shows that you ain't alone in your struggle against sin, and you're suffering from the consequences. Hebrews 12 verse 1 says, it's a strange verse. A lot of people make a big deal out of it, but I'm reasonably sure this is what it's talking about. We've been given a cloud of witnesses that can identify with how messy life gets. And you can take courage, because if they got through it, you can get through it. And one day you're going to be relieved of all this struggling against sin. Now, I'm going to read the verse now. If you know it, you can say it with me. But Hebrews 12 verse 1. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. There's that word, patience. Don't ever pray for patience, you'll get twins. Okay. You can't unscramble eggs. Once you scramble eggs and throw them in the skillet, they're scrambled. You can't unscramble them. But God can unscramble an egg. God can. God's free gift of grace is what the gospel is all about. And like I said, nobody can unscramble an egg but God. So take your scrambled egg life to God. He understands it. You ain't got to hide it. He understands the mess that you made, and He knows how to fix it. Hebrews 4, verse 16, and it's talking to people with a gummed up life that have made such a mess and dug such a deep pit for themselves that they got no idea what to do. Hebrews 4:16, if you're one of them people, let us therefore come boldly unto the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. That's what redemption's all about. You don't have to get good to come to God. You got to come to God to get good. Now, feet of clay. I mean, y'all know what that's talking about. Anyway, that's another story. Feet of clay. The Bible is unique. I don't know any other book that the heroes of the book are so flawed, and the Bible don't even try to hide it. And when you start talking about these people, that big old long list of folks that I went through, you start talking about them, and it usually makes people mad. You mean they're not heroes? They're not perfect? They think that they're good guys that you should try to pattern your lives after. I've heard, when I was growing up, I heard Sunday school lesson after Sunday school lesson about Joseph. You ought to be like Joseph. Wait till I get to him. I want to tell you what Joseph done. He wasn't a very nice feller at all, by the way. None of us are perfect. And you can be one of these heroes. As flawed and imperfect as you are. Because every one of these people in the Bible had exactly the same problems that we have. Exactly. They was a mess. That's a good thought. Ain't none of us are perfect. But we can still do some pretty amazing stuff. But I'm not sure that encouraging us to do great stuff in spite of our problems is the main purpose of telling all these stories about flawed heroes. Because when it comes to the Bible, you got to ask yourself, how many flaws does it take to knock you out of being a hero? It looks to me like a lot of them folks I talked about ain't really very good heroes, and their flaws are, some of them, their flaws are so bad it would disqualify them as heroes. You'd run them out of the church. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that way it sounded. All I gotta say is John the Baptist. You got any idea what that fella looked like? There was a guy that I'm kin to that lived up on the top of the mountain by himself. I don't know if he ever took a bath. He was awful looking. Just a sweetheart though. He loved me and my sister to death. And I hated going up there with my grandma because he smelled funny. And he dressed funny. John the Baptist was like that. He was like that. If John the Baptist was to come in that front door, somebody would probably meet him and ask him to go take a bath before he come back. But that's another story. That's another story. Let's talk about Joseph just for a minute, because like I said, I heard all them stories when I was growing up about what a good feller he was, and how God loved him, how God put him in that position so he could take care of his family. Truth is, if he was my brother, Well, if there's 12 of us, by the way, I got 12 brothers and sisters. That's a long story though. If he was my youngest brother, and he started being snotty towards all of us, bragging about all this stuff that God told him in them dreams, and he's telling his brothers the truth, you know, but they didn't want to hear all that. Who's this fella think he is? And they sold him into slavery. But while he was in slavery, he managed to get himself promoted in Potiphar's household. And then Potiphar's wife, she'd come on to him, and then he rejected her, and she told Potiphar, and he put him in prison. Anyway, they found out he could read dreams, so he got sent to Pharaoh's cabinet because he could interpret dreams. So he's a pretty good guy, except, do you know what he actually did during them 7 years of plenty? You know, God said there's going to be 7 years of plenty, and then there's going to be 7 years of famine. You know what he actually done to them Egyptians? It's pretty awful. During the 7 years of plenty, he confiscated most of their crops. He confiscated them and put them in the king's storehouses. Then during the famine, the 7-year famine that come later, he sold their own grain back to them when they didn't have much money to buy it back with. First, they sold their livestock. Then they sell their farms. And finally, when they ain't got nothing left, they sell themselves into slavery. Joseph makes most of them slaves. Is slavery okay when it's Egyptians that are being enslaved? And it's not okay when it's Hebrews? Joseph wasn't a very nice guy. Okay, what about David? Like old Joseph here, he started out being a good guy, a guy after man of God's own heart, but by the time he's ready to die, he's pretty pitiful. He covets and lusts, and then he commits murder. So, what's God do? He done the same thing to him he done to Pharaoh. He killed his firstborn son, and that's not a coincidence. A lot of folks get mad at God for killing David's firstborn son. They think God wasn't hard enough on David and took it out on that poor little innocent baby. But he did punish David. That baby had it made. God come down there and got that baby and took him to heaven with him. But David would never again have peace in his house. He would be publicly shamed for his private sin, and his son would die. 2 Samuel 12 verse 10 says, "Now therefore the sword shall never depart from thine house, because thou hast despised me, and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife. Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will raise up evil against thee out of thine own house, and I will take thy wives before thine eyes, and give them unto your neighbor. And he shall lie with thy wives." I'm not going to go through all that. That's real depressing. David, a man after God's own heart, suffered a fate a lot worse than death. Over where he was living, their culture was, it's kind of like the Japanese, honor-based. You know, honor. Anything before dishonor. Public humiliation was worse than death. God made a point out of reminding David in 2 Samuel that he wasn't just no common citizen, he was the king. So even though David didn't kill David for what he done, and did kill the baby, God's intention in killing that baby was to punish David. So the baby got sick, and after he was sick for a little while, he was gathered up into the arms of God, and that's not a bad thing.
No.
If you've ever watched a saint of God die, that's one of the sweetest things in the world. If you've ever watched a reprobate hellion die, I don't advise it. That's the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. Besides, let's get back to David. Killing David, if he'd have killed David for doing all that stuff, that would have sent the wrong message. Because now we're getting somewhere, okay? We're getting down here to where the rubber meets the road and stuff. God don't want to kill you. He wants to restore you to fellowship. That's what he wants. Every single one of us deserves to die for sinning. But God, by not killing David, his purpose with him is exactly the same as it is for you and me. He wants us to restore us to fellowship, not kill us for our sins. That's why, even under the law, even under Moses' law, there was an atonement ritual that they went through. And that's why Christ went through what he went through to atone for your sins and restore you to fellowship with him. So that David and us, neither one of us has to die because of our sins. Besides that, God had plans for David and Bathsheba. God lets people live, and sin is part of life. It's part of life. In this fallen world, sin and temptation are before us all the time. And I guess we become better people by wrestling with it. But God had plans for David and Bathsheba, okay? Solomon was going to be the next baby born to him. God has plans for you too. God's got plans for you. I know that in your private moments when you're sitting there in your room by yourself and wishing, boy, I wished I could get closer to God. I wished I felt better about being. I don't know if I'm doing this right or not. I wish. When you get down into that, when you're stumbling along, and it's hard to remember that God is right there with you. It's hard to remember that. But the whole time you're stumbling along and wrestling with that stuff, you're learning. And you're growing. And God is sanctifying you. 2 Peter 3:18 says it about the best. What you're supposed to be doing. You're not supposed to be beating yourself up because you ain't perfect. You're supposed to. 2 Peter 3:18. But grow in grace and in the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. To him be the glory, both now and forever. Amen. Old David, bless his heart, he had to live the rest of his life miserable. He died. When he died, he was weak, foolish, mentally messed up, and impotent. He had to be carried around. That ain't a hero that you want to copy. It's more like a warning. If something like that can happen to a man that God says is a man after his own heart, it can happen to you. Now remember old Moses back there smacked that rock? That wasn't what God told him to do to that rock. That rock represented Jesus, by the way. And God told Moses to speak to that rock. Moses got mad and hit that rock twice. And because of that, God didn't let him go in the promised land. Now Solomon, let's talk about Solomon, the old wise feller here, that he was the smartest guy on earth and everything. When his reign was over, he had, the word they use here is impoverished. The people were broke from his taxes and all of his wild stuff, and he had let them put idols in God's temple. But don't rush to judgment. Rush to mercy. They're all flawed characters, just like you. They're all heroes of the Bible. Probably not. I'm not sure it's right to call them heroes. they're not really examples for you to follow. They're more like a warning not to make the same mistakes they did, because Jesus is the only true hero in the Bible. The only one. And I'm not even talking about the fact that he lived a sinless life. You can forget that, because you ain't going to do that. Now that's pretty heroic, but you can't follow that. You cannot follow that example. What you can follow in his life is, after you get the Holy Spirit inside of you, you can be a man of peace, a man of justice, obedience, and faithfulness, even like Jesus did in the face of death. I'm pretty sure that Jesus is the example we're supposed to follow. Well, I appreciate y'all putting up with me, and I'll see you next week.
Did y'all appreciate that? Let's give Brother Floyd a round of applause.